Good evening. Welcome, welcome. It's really wonderful to see all of you here tonight. My name is Darren Klein. I'm the Associate Director of Events and Programs here at the Broad. And since opening its doors in 2015, the Broad has annually presented programming to commemorate World AIDS Day, recognizing the many who have lost their lives to the pandemic, the many that are still living with HIV/AIDS, and to acknowledge that globally speaking, the AIDS pandemic is not over. Although, as of 2025, World AIDS Day is no longer federally recognized, the Broad intends to continue to do important programming around this. Yes. At the height of the crisis, at the onset of the crisis in the 80s, artists became activism, and activism grew into an art form. Prime examples of this can be seen throughout the Broad collection in works by Keith Haring, David Vonerovich, Ross Bleckner, Mark Bradford, Glenn Ligon, and Jenny Holzer. These artists continue to use their artistic voices, the ones still living, to highlight the need for public awareness around HIV/AIDS. I want to give my heartfelt thanks to Artillery Magazine for co-presenting this event with us. They called earlier this year, yes, Artillery Magazine. Daniela Soberman called earlier this year and said, "What are you guys doing for World AIDS Day? Let's cook something up together and we can co-present," and we're thankful for that opportunity. I also want to give a heartfelt thanks to our program participants. We're not going to do long, lengthy bios. Their information is on the website. You probably read it when you booked tickets. But we have moderator Carolina Miranda, artist Joey Terrill, Rubén Esparza, Gonzales-Day, and Judy Ornelas Sisneros. Thank you also to Pro Bono ASL for providing sign language for us tonight. This event is being live streamed, and it'll also be archived on the Broad's YouTube channel, so you can tune in and turn friends on and share it around. Without further ado, let's get started.
Thank you, Darren, and thank you for the Broad and to our Artillery for hosting this incredibly important event. Before we get started, we just wanted to, given the stance of the federal government, to read a few names of those we have lost, and we wanted to start with people that everybody on this panel knew. Mary Lucy, Robert Lanchon, Delton Beeler, Louis Vella, Russell David Liebert, Allison Gertz, Eazy-E, Keith Haring, Rudolph Nureyev, Liberace, Rock Hudson, Fela Kuti. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. It is such an incredible pleasure to be here with these. We were having such a great chat in the conference room that we just wanted to invite you all to the conference room, because why mess around with this room, but here we are. So I wanted to start with, because I think it's important to kind of ground ourselves into what AIDS meant when it first emerged. And so I wanted to start with a flash round. We have a lot of ground to cover, so everybody's got to keep it a little short, which was, when and how did you become aware of HIV/AIDS, and that it was a disease that you would have to reckon with in some way? So Joey, why don't you start us here?
Okay, thank you, Carolina. For me, it was, I think, 1981, and I first read in the newspaper about a report of, I think it was 5 homosexual men, young, who were presenting with this rare illness, disease. And I was like shocked because they were all homosexuals. And then within a few weeks or a month, I was up in San Francisco, with friends strolling the Castro, and there were flyers and information with Xerox copies of individuals with Kaposi sarcoma lesions, and just this warning everyone, this is what's happening in our community, we need to talk about this. It didn't have a name, it was so incredibly scary. So
Thank you. Ruben?
It was 1980. I just moved to Houston, Texas from El Paso. I was 19 or 20 years old. I thought I was invincible, cocky, and sexy AF. So
You still are.
So, there was rumblings of this affliction, and I thought, well, it can't happen to me. It happens to older, promiscuous gays. And so later on, I found out I was very wrong, because in 1985, my first lover was diagnosed and then passed in 89. But the rumblings were there, and you kind of deny it. These are my formative years. I can't expire soon, Yeah.
I think for me, it was when I arrived in New York City in 1983. I had gone to high school in Nampa, Idaho, and then I was living in Liège, Belgium, which are another small town, and I hadn't heard about it. And then I arrived, and I'm basically a young queer person who's not yet out. I'm like 19 or 18. And I'm staying in somebody's apartment, and I see on the news this thing of this new disease. And I kind of had heard about it in French, but I didn't understand what it was. And this was the first time in America I was hearing about it. I knew I was queer. I knew New York was hot. There were all these sexy guys all over the place. And I had actually seen that Keith Haring was still drawing in the subways, and so this kind of amazing queer utopia of gay people everywhere, like from my perspective, and then this sort of promise of death. And so it was a very difficult experience. And then, of course, trying to become an artist and have a sexual wife and all of those things followed right after that.
I was living in San Francisco in 1984 in the Mission District, and I had actually been on vacation visiting my family down here in Southern California. And I got back, to my apartment, and back then we had answering machines, taped,
Old school.
Taped onto next to the phone. And so I was listening to my messages, and I had a message from a friend, someone who I had met at a job, but then, we became friends. And she sounded funny. She was saying, Judy, I'm not drunk. Very slurry. She goes, but I'm in the hospital. They don't know what's wrong with me. And can you come and visit me? And so the next day, I went to see her in the hospital. And by that time, I don't know when she had left the message because I had been gone a week, but by that time she was in a coma. And I was never able to talk to her, although I did talk to her. And I'm hoping that she heard my voice. But that was when it became clear. Well, I actually visited her husband a few weeks later, and he told me they believe she is the first woman to die of this disease that's going around that's impacting the gay community.
Thank you so much. I'd love to add my own little story to that, which is I'm a little bit younger than you guys, not by a bunch, but I was in high school when the Vincent Chalk case happened. And if you are from California, Vincent Chalk was a high school teacher in Irvine, California. I was a high school student in Irvine at the time. And he was fired from his job because he was diagnosed with AIDS. And he sued the Orange County Department of Education and actually won his position back, establishing a precedent for government employees to not be able to be fired because they are HIV positive. And there was a group of us, this was a period before the court case had been settled, and there was a group from my high school that went to see him speak when he was trying to draw awareness to the case. And mind you, this is 1987. At this point, it is perfectly clear how AIDS and HIV is transmitted, and obviously he was not going to pass it on to his students, but still people were incredibly paranoid, they were incredibly homophobic. And we went to his talk, and a group of us, and we all stood in line to shake his hand and make that public gesture of we believe the science. And it was so frustrating, I think, for us as students who were also burgeoning activists to think that the science didn't matter. And here we are again today at a moment in which science doesn't matter. So there's a lot of lessons to be learned from this era. So anyway, I want to get into this discussion. Thank you so much for sharing all of those stories. It's incredible. Health officials became aware of AIDS in the summer of 1981, yet it wasn't until 4 years later, in 1985, that President Reagan first mentioned the disease publicly. 4 years. This silence and the lack of investment in a cure had the effect of turning ordinary people into activists, advocates, spokespeople, caregivers, ad hoc nurses, ad hoc hospice caregivers. And so I wanted to know how you engaged with this impulse, either directly or through your art. And so, Ken, I'd love to start with you, just to pick on you. And I think we have, sorry, I'm juggling a lot of papers here, and I think we have like a good piece of art to refer to, so let me...
Close. No, number 17, I think?
Yeah, number 21, is it? The one of you in the t-shirt?
Yeah, I was thinking the t-shirt.
Okay, and number 21.
That's me. A few years ago.
Que cute.
So anyway, I was living in New York, and I guess as far as activism, going to all the marches. I was a student, so I was attending things, learning about stuff, seeing the art that was going on. And then for that one, I think that was 1992, and it was basically for the Republican convention in Texas, and we went from New York all the way down, and along the way we stopped in Atlanta, and I got that Queer Nation t-shirt, and I wore it, which if you've been to the Deep South, you can imagine back then, my friends, when I came out in the morning, they're like, Ken, I don't think you should wear that. And I'm like, you know what, you're probably right, but I put it on and I'm not taking it off. And so that day was pretty informative for me as a young person. I mean, it was pretty intense. People were not friendly, to say the least. And when we got to the convention, they had already started keeping people, we weren't allowed to actually go to the convention. They kept us a mile away in a parking lot. So it was the beginning of the end of that idea of activist disruption of political events. And so anyway, that was sort of my, I think, beginning, and then I think that.
And this was a moment in which the idea of embracing the word queer was still kind of controversial, right?
Yeah, and I wasn't sure that was a good idea either. As a young person, but people were very upset about that concept, and now all my students take it for granted that they are queer. So I think that's why I picked this one, because I thought it's an important shift, and it really is a different world now than it was then, and that word was hard won, in terms of thinking about the struggle. And I guess that was an example of literally wearing it and sort of taking it to the streets in my own way.
What about in terms of your work, if we could look, and actually, by the way, Ken's retrospective is on at the USC Fisher Museum right now, where you can see some of these early works that we're talking about. So if you have some time between now and I believe March 14th is when the exhibition closes, you can see these. If we could see slide number 20.
So this is one of the works that's in the show, curated by Amelia Jones, who's here. And basically you could see that it's early Photoshop 3, if you remember back that far. The files were only 25 megabytes total, and it was a lot of work. So basically I had to shoot them in film and then combine them all. I made the little model, and of course added the KS, and had written sort of story around it. And basically it's part of a project in the exhibition which is called The Bonegrass Boy, looking at Two-Spirit individuals and sort of the Southwest, and trying to, I guess, locate myself within the history. I had felt at the time that there was no Latino representation, and certainly I'd never seen a Latino professor in my lifetime. So I was trying to find a way to create a critically informed practice that would draw from my background, which was not valued at that time. People did not consider that to be a reasonable artistic practice. So I had to take my activism to the classroom and try to argue for a space for brown people. And I continue to do that in the spaces I'm in. But so it's great. The show is a great opportunity to think about the journey and kind of think about activism across different projects.
It's really interesting because like so much of Ken's work investigates like the history of California, the complicated racial histories and histories of violence, and part of what this project does is it goes back and like queers these important chapters of colonial history, of histories of settlement and expansion and violence.
And the short version of it is I play all the characters from my family's genealogy going back 300 years, so that all of the different positionalities are articulated in ways that are would have been authentic for the moment, right, in my family's history, but of course are all diluted within my current genetic makeup, right? So trying to think about ways of thinking about legacies and histories and bodies and the kinds of ways that nations have rewritten our bodies, borders, boundaries, genders, and it's set during the Mexican-American War when so much of America is up for grabs in terms of thinking about the Southwest and what will become the American Southwest.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So Rubén, I wanted to move on to, if we could get maybe, I don't know, slide number 5 up, just so we could get one of Rubén's artworks up. I wanted to ask you about how this activist impulse, this impulse of caregiving kind of played out in your life and your work at the time and to the present.
My activism is in the form of art making and organizing, but unbeknownst to me, I was in an ACT UP rally in Houston, of all places, October of 1989. This particular piece is something that was striking to me during COVID-19. It was like a very eerie reminder of the AIDS pandemic. And so my impulse was to create this poster very similarly to the Silence Equals Death, because it reminded me so much of that early period of the AIDS pandemic and this existential angst. And so I decided to do this piece that kind of told the world. Of course, both of these different pandemics are very, very different. The first one I experienced was pointed to marginalized people. And this second one that I survived, I've never had COVID-19 nor HIV. So it's interesting that I find it as a very gargantuan thing in my life that I survived these two pandemics. And so, but many did not, and many people that were very dear to me. And so it was an impulse. And so that's my activism is in the form of art making, like I said, organizing. I was also in Texas, I was involved with a group named Design Industries for Fighting AIDS. And so we would create marketing materials and ads for fundraisings or to acknowledge that the disease was in fact here. So that's kind of, I mean, I take to the streets too, but I also use it in other ways.
I think everyone here at some point or another was on the streets. Like, it was that kind of event. All right, Joey, let's see, let's pull up one of your works. Sorry, there are so many images here that number 27. Let's do number 27. No, that's 26. But that one's still beautiful. We like it. All right, that's 25, but that's okay.
Which one do you want, Joey?
That one.
So this is a painting I did in 1989 titled Remembrance. And what I was intending to do was to make art about the grieving that we were going through. I was already very familiar with all of the agitprop that came out of, ACT UP and Grand Fury and a lot of the work that was coming out of New York. But I wanted to do something that was positioned definitely within LA, Southern California, and I thought how best to do that would be through the foliage or the garden and the cactus. I also wanted it to be Latino or Chicano, and it's one of the only paintings where I actually posed myself for the work, and that's me in the center, and my boyfriend Robert at the time was positioned behind me. He was 9 years younger, and I'm wearing a shirt that was designed by my friend Arnie Araika, who had AIDS at the time. And when I made this, he said he was so grateful that his design would live forever because he knew he was going to die, and of course he did. I'm holding Birds of Paradise, which is the official flower of Los Angeles, city of Los Angeles. And what I was trying to do was trying to surround us in this claustrophobic, at the same time that it was beautiful, it was also kind of scary because you don't want to fall on those cactus, right? So I wanted to get that kind of a feeling, and that's what I did with that. I posed Robert behind me. He was 9 years younger. At that time, we were grieving for my friends who were dying. None of his friends yet had contracted HIV and AIDS. So that's the story of that.
It's kind of incredible how it was almost like a tornado, the epidemic, in terms of it would destroy facets of a community, but then others would remain standing. And when we were in the conference room, I had asked everybody for one name that we could read out loud, and Joey had a notebook with dozens
82
of names. 82 names.
Also, I'll just state for 1989, that's the year that I actually tested positive for HIV, and it was also the year that Carlos Almaraz, who I revered as a Chicano artist and someone I looked up to, died as well. So all of these things and the idea of grief was hitting me very hard.
You later went to work at the AIDS Healthcare Foundation where
yes.
you had more of like an activist policy role. Sort of, how did those years shape the work that you did for them later?
Well, first I'll just tell you. I mean, a long time ago, I had decided by the late '70s that if I wasn't going to be the next Andy Warhol, that I needed to have a day job. I wanted to do something that actually meant something or gave back, and so I went into case management at the Center for the Partially Sighted, working with older adults who were experiencing age-related vision loss, macular degeneration. They were in their 60s and 70s, and they could get counseling, they could get special glasses, and they would be fine. Then we saw our first client with AIDS-related sight loss, and that was Roger Horowitz. He was a very well-known lawyer in West Hollywood. He was the partner of Paul Monette, the writer, and he came into the center in the clinic in his bathrobe. He was very weak, and in doing the intake with him, I recognized right away that, oh my God, the systems that are in place to provide services for the blind or visually impaired was not going to work for people that were experiencing AIDS-related sight loss. It was end stage. You had 50 T cells, 6-month life expectancy. The age range was like between 20 to 40. And it was a constant barrage of other opportunistic infections. They had, Kaposi sarcoma, they had cancer, they had, diarrhea, a number of things, and now they were going blind. So that led to our developing the HIV and vision loss program, which is a whole nother panel. And then that ended up me transitioning into AIDS Healthcare Foundation, where I worked in advocacy and public policy.
Around the world.
Yeah, I ended up the last 6 years. I retired 4 years ago, and I retired as the Director of Global Advocacy and Partnerships for AIDS Healthcare Foundation. At that time, 44 countries, 5 global bureaus, 1.4 million people in care, and I worked with a tremendous team of individuals in countries in Cambodia, China, Uganda, Kenya, Mexico. I mean, I'm not going to name every country, but, and it was an opportunity that I recognized I would never have otherwise chosen or have had, except that AIDS and the battle and advocacy just kind of drew me into that. And I love the work that I was doing at that time, and I do miss the advocacy. Some of these people are heroes. And I got to meet a lot of young people, especially in Africa, a lot of young girls who were living with HIV, whose parents died of AIDS, whose, their villages, some of them would reject them. It was just a horrible, tremendous level of AIDS phobia that I hadn't quite seen in the US. So that was, and again, that's a whole nother discussion.
But I mean, that's such a powerful thing too, because you've talked about going to some of these villages and being able to say, look, I have this too, and here I am.
Well, that was one thing that I came to recognize, that, I wasn't a doctor, I didn't have a medical profession, I don't have a degree, I can't bring those things to the table. But what I could bring is that I've been living now 45 years HIV positive, so that I could talk to these young people and let them know that they have a life, and that if they continued with their medication, they would get gray hair just like me. And it really had an impact with a lot of them. I mean, I was moved by, that I was able to do that. And I remember some of the girls in these vast areas of Kenya and Uganda and villages, they said, no white man has ever come and spoken to us about HIV. And I said, well, they still haven't. Because but so, I did my part to encourage and support them in their efforts, so.
Amazing. Could we cue up image number 10? I wanted to turn to Judy, whose trajectory as an artist is a little different. You were an activist first, doing critical work for organizations like ACT UP. Judy has been arrested half a dozen times for on the front lines of protest, and you picked up the camera to document what you were seeing. And so I wanted to get a sense, why was it important for you to do that? And looking back, what did your camera record that otherwise might have been lost?
Well, as a member of ACT UP, and just to preface that, I had been doing clinic defense work, and I met members of ACT UP when I was defending clinics, and that's how I got involved in that organization. When I was in ACT UP, I was a part of the Women's Caucus. I went to the very first meeting. I co-facilitated the Agitating Legal Committee, and being in all these committees, you do work with other committees, public policy, treatment, all of that. But I decided I wanted to do something on my own. I mean, it was very intense work. I was working full-time in the private sector, and then going to the general meetings on Monday nights, committee meetings during the week. I tell people, I can't remember when I fed my cat or did my laundry. I mean, it was just really intense. And, people were sick, and you were trying to support them, plus try to have an impact on what was going on in Los Angeles. And we also did work with the other ACT UPs to have some kind of impact on a national level. But I think mainly I wanted to just take photographs of where I was and the people who, I was surrounded by. There were two other photographers in ACT UP, amazing photographers, Chuck Stollard and Robert Navarrete, who they had more photographs in the ACT UP LA newsletters, which, by the way, you can see at the One Archives and Library at USC. But I just felt, and I had always been interested in photography. My mother had Life and Look magazines, so I would go through those, and I didn't even know who the photographers were at the time. I was just like, wow, this photo, these people look so different, because I was in Bakersfield. I'm from Bakersfield. And then in seeing, Deanne Arbus' work on the streets of New York, I'm like, why are they dressed so weird? I'm fascinated, you know. It's just everyone, you know, it really opened my eyes to people outside of my Bakersfield bubble. But by this time, you know, I had spent many years in San Francisco, but I just finally decided to start documenting. And so, you know, being a part of the Women's Caucus, I really tried to focus on women, but looking back, I don't have a lot of photography from that time. This is like maybe the second or third row I ever took from a SLR camera. You know, so I was kind of learning on the job. And so that's, you know, I just wanted to do something that wasn't a part of a committee, but take images that I felt were important.
I mean, you have an incredible archive, and I think your work also speaks to, even though this initially emerged as a gay man's disease, the critical role that women played as activists, as caregivers, as rabble-rousers.
And I would like to talk about that photo specifically, about what we were doing, what that photo is about.
Was it number 10?
Yes, number 10.
Let's go back to number 10.
So this was in Sacramento, and this is Ellen Yellowbird. She was obviously on the bullhorn. We had done in 1990, in the fall of 1990, a protest at Frontera Prison for Women. So a woman, Mary Lucy, who you had mentioned earlier, she and her partner started coming to ACT UP LA meetings in 1990 because she was a person with AIDS, and she saw how women were treated in the facility. Okay, so she brought the issue of prisoners with AIDS to the body of ACT UP LA, and that became one of our very important issues. So then in 1991, we had another demonstration in Sacramento on the Capitol steps, and also a small affinity group, 19 people, took over the office of the director of the California Department of Corrections to, you know, place our demands. This is the third action where we were able to sneak up into those offices. But by this time, they knew we were coming and we were locked out, but that's fine. We had the march, and this is the rally outside. And you could see the person with, it has ACT UP with a chain around it. That was actually a group of California ACT UP chapters who got together to do this action. So spearheaded by ACT UP LA, but also ACT UP San Francisco, ACT UP in Santa Barbara was involved. And so that chain was California HIV Activists and Inmate Network, something like that. So this is, you know, I really love this photo because, you know, you could see Ellen in the center. She's surrounded by other activists, and then, you know, shadowed by law enforcement who were all over the place.
Remarkable images. You have all engaged the subject of HIV and AIDS in direct and indirect ways in your work, and so I'd love to know what compelled you to first engage the subject, and what it's like to look at some of that work in retrospect. And I'd love to start with Rubén. He has this great piece, slide number 1. If you could tell us a little bit about that work.
Wow, that's pretty intense.
None of this is light.
During the period of 1989 and 1994, I did not test myself for HIV. I was too nervous because I felt for sure I was next, because my first love, I love saying that, my first love passed away from complications with AIDS in 1989. So, and he was diagnosed at 20 years old, and he died at 24. He was one of the youngest people diagnosed in the country, but he had a great support system. So it was, you know, so from 85 to 89, it's like hell number 1. And so hell number 2 was 89 to 94, because I was for sure thought, I'm next, right? I played around, because remember, I was sexy AF.
Still are.
If you all remember. And so for sure, I mean, you have to remember, if you're diagnosed HIV-positive in that period, it was a death sentence. There's no arguing this, and it's just a slow decline, a brutal and horrific thing to experience. It changed who I am. And so I wanted to create a piece that was disturbing and to kind of mirror how I felt during that period. And so I actually, along with this, I mean, I did a whole series of glove pieces because gloves were very iconic during that period because it was a protection from other bodies and you protecting from other bodies that could be infected. I hate that word, infected. And so I wanted to do a series of pieces that spoke about that. And I also have to thank Ron Athey because he was very inspirational in this kind of blood work, as it were. And so I did this in '95, and I wanted to go back and experience that horrific time and create this, the piece that was disturbing. But at the same token, when I first moved here in '91, I forged some great friendships. And so this piece is a combination of that terror, but also of loyalty. So I asked my friends to volunteer to donate blood, and I hired a phlebotomist. And so I collected the blood, and I created this whole series of pieces that talks about that. So in the summer of '94, when I went to the doctors to get checked, and then you waited 2 weeks, right? And I took that Friday off so that I could either, cry or go to the beach. So, so the news was HIV neg, and I had a whole day planned that I was going to go to the beach, go for a swim, naked, and do all kinds of things. So that was the, I thought this piece was disturbing, and it spoke to what I was trying to do. Yeah, and it's interesting how I see new things as I see it 30 years later. It's just interesting.
Yeah.
It's a great marker in my life.
Your story is a story I've heard so often from men during that era, kind of resisting the idea of testing because you just didn't want to know. It's like you didn't want to have to dwell in that. And it's also interesting because I think in taking another look at it, 1995, the year in this piece when this piece was made, was the year that protease inhibitors were introduced as part of the HIV/AIDS drug regimen, and they really marked a turnaround in how the disease could be dealt with and managed. And so it's almost like your piece marks a coda.
Yes.
To this era of terrible fear.
It was a bitter pill, as it were, because a lot of friends would have been saved. And I think Joey could speak, because I did this piece with Joey as kind of like the cocktail that kind of was introduced in '96, '97. But as an homage to Ray Navarro, I did this piece, but kind of because we lost Ray Navarro. He was an activist, Chicano activist, died at the age of 26. So I wanted to kind of do chapter 2. If Ray were around and made the cut, right, he would be taking this cocktail that would keep him alive. So I'm sure Joey could talk about that period where the famous cocktail was introduced to the world.
But just to clarify, that cocktail didn't work for everyone.
Of course, yeah.
And
It was not
also,
a magic pill.
And also, some people suffered side effects that caused their deaths. Liver failure was very common.
Correct. Absolutely. Joey, was there a particular work that you wanted to highlight?
I don't know. Well, we
32?
yeah. Well,
Let's do 32.
That's fine. So I should tell you that in 1996, I tested undetectable for the first time, and it just I didn't know what to think about it. I was numb. I was exhilarated, but I was also puzzled. I had all these ambiguous feelings because why am I still here? Why am I alive? It meant that I was not going to die from AIDS. It's the first time in years that I recognized that I wasn't going to die. And then, of course, but why me when, 10 other friends that took the same drugs are no longer here. I was also a big advocate against the pharmaceutical industry and big pharma and the price gouging, and that's a whole nother story. But I didn't know how to make art that sort of put all these ambiguous feelings together. And my usual method for painting was taking one image source, one photograph, and then painting that image. And it was while I was sitting at my breakfast table with my Cheerios and my HIV meds that I thought, oh, this looks like a Tom Wesselman still life, you know, how silly. And I thought, that's it. I'm gonna make my own versions of still lifes with HIV medications, but my intent was to both queerize and Mexicanize the still lifes. I wanted to make sure that it was still within what we call the Chicano art, you know.
Gotta have a cobija.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. But one of the things that occurred, so I've done these ever since in the 90s, and there's a lot behind each one, but this is from 2023, this one, and it's titled, and please tell me if I don't get the title right.
Unfortunately, I don't have the
okay.
title, so nobody here will know.
Yeah.
Don't fact check this.
The title is Still Life with Triamec and Wrapped Candies That Remind Me of the Artist Felix Gonzalez Torres. Okay, and what I started to do was that I recognized that along with placing HIV meds in a domestic setting with products and things, right, that a lot of people can relate to on some level, in these very surreal compositions, I could also now start to pay homage to artists who have died from AIDS. And I was prompted to include the candies because of the controversy over Felix Gonzalez Torres' work, where the text and the titles were being altered or tweaked to remove any reference to HIV, which I just found appalling. I was very angry about that, so that's why I put that in there. And I've since done that with other works as well to honor Teddy Sandoval, Gil Quadros, other folks, and David Wojnarowicz, and I'm going to continue to do that. Instead of just it being about my medication, I want to pay homage to all those other artists who are no longer here.
And I think some of the canvases have actual medication attached to the surface, correct?
Yeah, well, and when I first started out, I started out because the first one was Still Life with Crixivan. When I tested positive in '89, you know, and the reason I tested positive, just for folks that don't know, I, like Rubén, did not want to get tested. I saw no value in it. I knew that if I tested positive, I would be so depressed, I would get so upset. I didn't think I could function. I didn't see any value in it until the medical community started to change the idea about you can start on certain medications early and you can stave off or mitigate the onset of AIDS. And I said, well, that makes sense. So that's why I tested, and unfortunately I tested positive, and it, freaked me out. But I enrolled in a clinical trial for Crixivan out of UCLA, and talk about side effects. I had kidney stones. I got very familiar with what it was like to have kidney stones. Very painful, and so I had to stop. But I had a bottle of the pills, and I said, this is $10,000 worth of medication here. I'm not just going to throw it away. And I said, I'll figure something out. And that was when I tested undetectable. I used those pills directly onto the canvas. And I would do the actual pills with my cocktail. But then after a while, I thought, this is art. I can make them big or small. I can do whatever I want. So I started to play with the textures, the ideas, the mediums. And now I rarely use any actual pills. Everything is constructed or fabricated on there.
Too expensive.
Well.
I wanted to go back to the question of activism, because activism in the sort of 80s and 90s could be very theatrical. Protesters took to the streets bearing coffins, they staged die-ins, they interrupted church masses, ACT UP activists dumped the ashes of their dead loved ones on the White House lawn. And we are now at a moment in which the Trump administration is cutting critical programs like the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, otherwise known as PEPFAR. And he's demonizing trans people. It's also a time in which ICE is raiding communities around the country, and, you know, queer immigrants like Andrea Hernandez Romero all of a sudden find themselves in a Salvadoran prison. And so I wanted to know from you, and I think we'll start with Judy, because Judy was really in the trenches on the activism of what can we learn from the ways in which activists from the AIDS era wielded protest. What are the lessons that we can begin to apply
As
now?
far as creative elements.
Creative or effective or rowdy or...
Okay. Well, I think that people shouldn't be afraid to take chances, first of all. We had very effective actions in working in solidarity with other organizations or just with, you know, our own, you know, body of activists. But also we had affinity groups that could be stealth and visible, then visible. For instance, we had an affinity group called Say No, Stop AIDS Now or Else, and they made a plan to go to the Rose Bowl. I believe it was January 1st, 1990, where they went out and, they chained themselves together and they stopped the Rose Parade for a few minutes with a banner. Okay, so that's stealth and then visibility. But that there were other actions where people would leave stealth messages in various forms, and you know, people never knew who did it. Now, the purpose of affinity groups and ACT UP was someone would come up with an idea, and it wouldn't necessarily be sanctioned by the body, but they would ask a close group of people, anywhere from probably 3 to a dozen, to do an action, but it wasn't talked about in the general body. There was no approval asked, and you know, so Say No was one of those. And so people should, I really think, should try to be creative and not be afraid to try and experiment with their messaging. And if you're going to do it, you need to get that message concise and make sure people will understand it. Otherwise, you know, you don't want it to get convoluted and people to look at your messaging and say, what are they trying to say exactly? You know, so there were various affinity groups throughout the history of ACT UP LA, and obviously San Francisco ACT UP, they stopped the Golden Gate Bridge, the Say No group there, and the San Francisco Opera. I don't know of a similar group in New York, Chicago, Philadelphia, DC, Boston, Dallas, all of the other chapters, you know, and those internationally, but, you know, I'm more familiar with what was going on in California. But I would just say, be creative. I mean, be visible with your messaging. It's so important right now, and, you know, I love what was happening in Portland with the ice and people going out with inflatable costumes. I mean, you know, some people might think it's silly, but you
brilliant.
know, I thought it was brilliant. It de-escalated the situation, and it really took away from the message that the current administration was trying to, you know, to send out to people that Portland was burning and it was a violent city. And now I want one of those frog costumes.
Same. I know, seriously, while I was watching Portland Frog, I remember turning to my husband going, do I get a frog inflatable?
And I was like, which animal should I get?
Exactly. Does anyone else have any advice for how we can sort of take the activism ethos of that era and either apply it either through activism or through art at this moment?
I'll just make one observation here that, you know, when you say that the actions were theatrical and over the top, whatever, they needed to be, okay? There was no internet. There was no, you know, social media. It was the 20th century. And you had to really have an impact. You had to shock people. And I think that the level of energy, and please tell me if I'm incorrect, was reflective of the melodrama that we were all going through. Our friends were fucking dying. We were witnessing this every day, and the government was just cruelly indifferent. So
You're totally correct.
okay, thank you. Yeah,
Absolutely.
and then today in the 21st century, it's going to be different because we do have the internet, and we have, you know, for good and bad, there's all sorts of other factors involved, and I hope that people follow Judy's suggestion about be creative.
But I think it's important to remember, if I may say, because Judy was saying this earlier when we were talking in the conference room, is that it's the person that the internet is a great tool, but it's not a replacement for the person-to-person activism. You were talking about like how everything worked on a phone tree back in the day. That's how you would deploy.
That's, you know, we would have lists of people who would be on the top of a tier, and we say, okay, we're going to do this, you know, sometimes spontaneous action. And so we'd call, you know, people at the top of the tier, and they had already been assigned to call 5 people, and then those 5 people would call a group of people. So we didn't have social media, obviously, back in the day. We didn't have computers. At least, you know, on a general, you know, mass market basis that we do today. But also the other thing I had mentioned that I really advocate, so some people may be too young to remember or to even know what a phone tree is, you know, but that's—
Time for some definitions.
Right. So, but I think people, young people, activists, or anyone who's an activist who doesn't know should learn what a phone tree is, because I'm paranoid enough to know that if the current administration decides to cut off communications between certain groups of people, that you could still call your fellow, activists and say, you know, we're going to do this, you need to pass along. They need to know what the concept is of a phone tree and learn what they would need to do if they had to activate it.
For sure. So we are getting to question time from the audience, but before we get to that, I just wanted to ask one more question, and it was, you know, AIDS has shaped so much. I mean, just this conversation makes evident how much HIV and AIDS have shaped our society, our art. And I'd love to get a sense from you of how you think it has shaped you as an artist and how it has shaped the culture in general. And I'd love to start with Ken, and if we could cue up image number 17. So yeah, how has the AIDS epidemic shaped you in culture and culture in general? Either or both.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I'm a little bit younger than some of the panelists, so I was really a student for much of that. I went to some of those actions, but I wasn't an organizer or anything like that. I was just a participant. But this is basically 2010. If you guys recall, the first version of gay marriage was in San Francisco, created by the mayor, Governor Newsom now. And basically, I was living here with my partner. We had never thought we'd want to get married. We were of the generation where gay people, that was a bourgeois goal, and we were, why would we want to buy into that? And it never occurred to us as something that we would ever want to do. And then we were watching on the news and basically seeing the couples getting married, and we thought, well, maybe we should go. And we've been together a long time. We might be a good example to show that gay people aren't crazy, that they could, pay the rent or whatever. So we looked at each other, we said, should we get married? And, do you want to get married? It was, in the kitchen, and we basically, Southwest Airlines bought the ticket, flew up to San Francisco, got married on the steps in City Hall in San Francisco.
Oh my God, did Gavin Newsom marry you?
No. That would be cool. No, actually, they had all these volunteers, and the person that married us read my partner the vows, and then I didn't get to read my vows. And we asked the lady, well, my husband asked, well, doesn't he get to read his vows? And she thought for a minute, she was like, no. And so I never got to do it in that way. So later when we had a reception, my aunt had me read the vows. But it was because there were so many volunteers in City Hall, there were literally hundreds of people getting married, and so it was like, okay, fine, whatever, it's all good. That marriage was invalidated shortly then after.
Through
And-
Prop 8, correct?
Yeah, Prop 8. And then, so long story short, I made this piece in 2010. I was a fellow at the Getty Research Institute, and I asked if I could photograph the objects in the collection, which I don't think many people have had a chance to do. And so my project was both engaging with the Getty Museum's collection and trying to think about how to represent ideas of difference, queer marriage, basically. At the time that I made this, the California Supreme Court was debating whether it could be legal or not. And so this was on view and seen by, they estimate 6 million people driving by and seeing it. So thinking about activism and ACT UP and the legacy of protest art, I made this, obviously, it could almost be Grand Fury or something. I mean, now looking at it now, basically trying to address the idea of what is going on here. Are they allowed to be together? Are they not? Having these objects reactivate. I didn't make the sculptures, I just photographed the sculptures and put them together in a new way to think about all of the possible narratives. Is it about desire? Is it about colonialism? Is it about conquest? What are we seeing here? What are the kinds of relations that exist between people, and what are the kind of distances between them? So the distance in the middle is that the ambivalence of sort of what will happen. And 4 months after this came down, the Supreme Court supported gay marriage. So for me, it was my way of trying to contribute to the conversation. I did get emails from people. At the bottom, the only thing we had was the website for the exhibition. People would write me, what is this about? What's going on? So I felt like it was actually incredibly liberating as an artist from photographing these objects in a very formal setting of the Getty. I'm sure you've all been there. And trying to find a way to take that institutional legacy and to move it in a different direction and to create a different kind of discourse with objects that are normally seen as oppressive, normally seen as representational violence within the institution, within our culture, and to try to take that existing legacy, not to deny it, but to repurpose it and to create a new space for people to think about that. And this was, so for the show, the billboard was organized by the Mack Center for Art and Architecture. And basically I had to propose it, so I proposed both, the boy version or the girl version, and they picked the boy version. And so the girl version I did eventually show. You're seeing here at a place called Cienega Projects, and then later was shown at Art Basel in Miami. And again, trying to think about that idea of what do we see and what do we project into the figures. In this case, they're also still Getty objects, living a very different life. And the short, I should probably stop.
No, I mean, I'm also just fascinated by, in terms of this recontextualization as well, is the recontextualization of marriage. You talked about how you first approached it as this rather bourgeois thing, but the AIDS pandemic had made clear that having a legal partnership with someone was a critical thing to have when they're dying and in a hospital and you might be denied access to them.
Right, and also you would lose your house. So if you had a house together, the parents, the families often, there were many stories of friends of ours who were kicked out of their house that they paid the mortgage on, and they had a partner, and the parents didn't care, or the family, or extended family. So we were obviously trying to protect each other as well, and realize that marriage is not simply a bourgeois thing. It represents a lot of privilege. There's a lot of privilege wrapped into it, and I wanted a little bit of that security and all of that. So that was a big part of it, and sort of the shift in terms of thinking of me kind of coming of age at that period, because this is kind of after grad school, and sort of me as an adult artist in the world trying to make a space.
Awesome. I think we should probably turn to some audience questions. I don't know if anybody, because we could keep talking about the art all night. I don't know if anybody had any questions. You can raise your hand. Oh yes, back there in a white sleeve with a red cuff. I think you're wearing a baseball cap. I have these incredibly bright lights in my face. So it's
We really can't see you.
So yeah, go ahead and shout out your question and I'll repeat it.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly.
Cool. Thank you all for the work that you shared with us today. They're incredibly inspiring and moving. I really appreciate it. I just wanted to ask you all how you would advise someone who is also creating artwork in terms of their own identity in relation to their status, how they could go about actually creating the work to produce in wider quantities to give to other people, I guess. I've been creating artwork about my positive status for like 10 years now, but I'm mostly only able to make like one thing for myself, and I would support that, whether it be like the shirt that I designed today, or different hats or shirts, or anything that was very affirming to my status. And I would go to places, just working in the HIV field for the past 15 years, would be going to places like HIV and AIDS conferences all around the country. And I would love to have my own table there with status affirming messages, but I just don't have the financial means to produce a lot of my work. So how would you all, I don't know if there's like HIV arts scholarships out there or anything like that for folks who are trying to follow in your footsteps. Thank you.
Let me just repeat that question quickly for anybody who may be watching the live stream. Basically, someone in the audience asked, an artist who is also HIV positive, asked how he might create work that could be more broadly shared with a general audience, but without having big budgets. Like, what resources might there be out there for him to do that kind of work? I don't know if there's somebody that wants to tackle that question.
I can give it a go. There's an organization called Queer Art out of New York, but it works across the nation, and they basically have a listserv which gives opportunities. It promotes the artists that are membership in it, so you can apply for it, and they're paired with a mentor, and they have a bunch of resources. So even if you don't get selected to be in that program, you can still tap into those resources. And then Creative Capital is also another resource for artists that one can apply for grants, and they have lots of workshops as well. So part of it is just getting out there and meeting people that are active and getting yourself visible. Of course, social media, we all know that part. But if it's your algorithm, you're not going to get any new people, right? So the trick is to connect with some larger organizations. And those are two I could think of.
And I think the trick with grants, as somebody who sat on the jury for a number of grants, is not just applying once and thinking, oh, I didn't get it this time, that's it. It's sometimes it's just being in the game, and then your number comes up. So
I'll also just suggest, and if you haven't already, Visual AIDS out of New York is a great, organization that archives, supports artists living with HIV, artists that have died of HIV. There's any number of curations where they take images and add them to online exhibits, as well as supporting artists out in the real world. So that's one place. The other thing is that you mentioned, conferences, and I mean, I've been retired now for 4 years, and so I am out of the loop. But the International AIDS Conference, as well as the United States Conference on AIDS, they usually do have an arts component at every convention that they have, every meetings. So I would reach out there and maybe hook up with other artists, because I know that, I used to meet them at the conferences. So those would be my two suggestions.
thank you so much. Any other questions? Oh, right here in the front row, sir.
I'm just wondering if you guys can comment on how the incredible loss of queer artists has affected queer community, queer culture, and our world in general.
I'll repeat the question for online, is how have all the losses affected queer culture, the queer community, and queer arts?
Loss of queer artists.
The loss of queer artists.
Devastating. I mean, we have so many voices that have been lost, and if you think about some of the known voices like Ray Navarro and Wojanowitz, you know their body of work, Gil Quadros, you could see that, they had so much more to give, but they were, cut short. So I think that's something that, our culture, our society, it's a huge devastating loss. And, I think that we can still talk about their work, and hopefully that will get people interested, and then other artists will step up to give voice to people with AIDS and to the queer community.
Could we cue up image number 31? Go ahead.
No, I was going to just add to what Judy was saying here. I'll just maybe state the obvious. First of all, the arts arts community, and I'm using that term broadly, has never been impacted more by any particular disease or illness that I'm aware of. Okay, and I'm talking about dancers, choreographers, playwrights, actors, actresses, musicians, painters, sculptors. I mean, it just across the globe, it has had that impact. The other side to that is that there has never been a disease or illness for which there has been such an artistic response. Okay, I mean, from all the artists that we've mentioned here, but also the Names Project quilt, which now today is the largest, collaborative folk art in the world. And at some point, I would love to be able to see it placed in a permanent location as a. It's not going to happen during this administration, I know, but as well as there have been plays and movies and paintings, and the response has just been tremendous all over across the globe. And then Fran Lebowitz pointed something out one time. If you've ever seen any of her interviews, whatever, and she said, it didn't just impact the artists; it impacted the audiences, the queer audiences, the gay audiences who used to go and support things like ballet, opera, choreography, punk bands. I mean, going to the clubs. I mean, most of the people that I knew from the clubs in LA or whatever are all gone.
The boards of many of these arts organizations suffered a lot of losses.
Yeah. And also, I'd like to say that it's not just the disease, but the queer community, queer artists were targeted. Okay, the loss of NEA funds targeted by the government, targeted by cultural institutions, medical institutions. We're not going to, we're taking away your funding, we're taking away your treatment, you're not going to get access. It was a targeted devastation.
Unfortunately, that target hits every artist, because the NEA, we're the only country that doesn't have a national endowment for the arts where artists can apply for support from their government. And look at Canada, has a nice, hearty. So that affects all artists. I was also going to say writers and scholars and critics that we lost. There was so much incredible thinking that was stopped mid-sentence, and we never got to see what the argument would be or where that would go. And the art is linked to critical thinking, right? Art is a critical practice, and so that aspect of it sometimes gets lost as well. It's not simply that we're responding to a trauma, it's that we're embedded within a discourse, and the discourse requires a critical framework, it requires a set of strategies, it requires a political strategy, it requires a community interested in that conversation. So we lost all that. I mean, for me as a young artist, I knew Keith Haring a little bit, I knew David Wojnarowicz, Felix Gonzalez-Torres, just briefly, but just all of those amazing artists that seemed like at the top of their game disappeared, and I was 20 something or whatever. So that I think that still lives on, that sort of absence.
Yeah. I think if before we go to the next question, I would just love it if Joey could just tell us a little bit about this work, because it very much deals with that.
Okay, so over the years, back in the the late 80s, early 90s, whatever, I said to myself, I've reached 50 people that I knew that had died. And I said, okay, I'm just not going to count anymore. That's it. I can't do this. But I started to do these collage works that take a section of the Caravaggio painting, The Entombment of Christ. And the section that I took, to me, focuses on the dead human Christ and the grief that, Nicodemus and Mary and whoever is there. And I borrowed the trope of Warhol and repeated it. I would do this in like 8 sections, 5 sections, different. And then finally, 2 years ago, I said, you know what, it's time to do all 50. And so this is a diptych that I did. And a couple aspects to this that I like is that every image is the same, but yet every image is painted individually. So I like to think that I'm making comment on, we talk about AIDS victims or people that died of AIDS, but every one of them was an individual. The other thing someone pointed out to me, and I love this, that they said, the jewel-like colors that you used, they kind of look like stained glass. And I thought, oh, okay, yeah. Because don't get me started on the Catholic Church. That's next week's panel. But anyway.
We'll be here next Wednesday.
Thank you.
Any other, back there.
My favorite stick. Just thank you all so much for being here and sharing. I was wondering, and thank you for sharing such helpful information for emerging activists and activists that are hoping to continue this legacy. What is giving you joy right now?
So let me repeat that for the online folks. Someone in the audience asked, what is giving you joy right now? Let's start with Rubén, since Rubén did.
What is giving me joy right now? Well, I'm happily married. I've been married for 28 years. Thank you. And, simple pleasures are the best. I never thought that I'd end up with a partner so loving, and actually it turned out very similar to my first love. They have the same traits. You know that saying, you always date the same person? So I was lucky, you know what I mean? So I was lucky to find someone that had the same qualities that I love so much. So my husband and I we're always talking, and he's like, I asked him, what brings you joy? What do you love? I said, I just love staying at home, and you cook, and we watch Netflix, and we cuddle. And so we've been doing a lot of that lately. So that's what's bringing me joy. It's so that I thought for a while that I wouldn't find love again, and I did, and so that brings me a lot of joy. Oh, hi, Holly. Thanks for the question.
Judy, you want to?
Well, right now I'd say being able to show some of my photographs, a couple of them that have never been seen publicly. Now, just people might or might not wonder what some of the photographs are that are beyond ACT UP.
Could we get image number 11? Sorry to butt in.
That's okay. What I wanted to do, the purpose of showing this is now the 2006 Marcha Lesbica in Mexico City, and I went with an arts organization, an offshoot of Que Viva, and Tongues was all women writers and different, artists, and so we actually connected with a group of women in Mexico City that had started, this is the 3rd annual Marcha Lesbica, so they had started doing these marches. And so basically this image and the other images that you will see of people in the street, I wanted to show that there was, after ACT UP, there were still modes of resistance where people were gathering in the streets. Now, you could see smiles on their faces. If you've never been to a Dyke March, well, people, they gather in a spot and we march somewhere, but it's usually mainly a visibility action. But, you gather, you have fun meeting friends, you make new friends, you avoid exes, there's all of that, all of the things that happen when community gets together. And so this is an image at the, horrible Spanish, Monumento de la Revolución in Mexico City.
Well done.
And these are 2 women that came from the U.S. There were about a dozen that came from the Tongues organization that I went with, but this couple right here and the couple in the background, both couples were from the U.S. So it's just, global connection of resistance and joy.
I want to add that Judy was a key organizer of the 1993 National Dyke March, correct?
Right, on the eve of the 1993 LGBT March in DC, which I call more of a parade. The Dyke March was really more of a march and very intense and fun, and women with their shirts off, and there were some torches, fire eating, puppets. There were they estimated 20,000 women Okay, this is April 1993, the eve of the big parade the next day. I think we had been estimating maybe 3,000 women would show up, but the National Women's Caucus, the ACT UP National Women's Caucus, helped organize that National Dyke March, and we're not really given credit for helping to co-organize it, but we're trying to get the word out there. There is a book that's being planned called ACT UP Beyond New York, and it's going to focus on chapters, what chapters did outside of New York, because everyone's like, New York, ACT UP, New York, ACT UP, but we did so much work in our local cities, counties, states, and the National ACT UP Women's Caucus. It was a national Dyke March. It wasn't just from one big major city. And so there's going to be a chapter on our organizing that's going to be a part of that book.
So it's safe to say you like being dykey, brings you joy?
Pardon me? What?
Being dykey brings you joy?
I couldn't hear you. I'm sorry, bad hearing.
I also want to add that art making also brings me a lot of joy. It's a close second. You know.
Ken, what about you?
Could I have the slide of the skulls?
Yes.
I have it show up right now, so that brings me joy.
Yes, number 24.
Anyway, you can find more information online, but I'm pretty proud of it. I was thinking about the current moment we're in, and basically the way these are objects that were photographed in the Smithsonian National Portrait Gallery, where I had photographed them, and Kate Sajat, the director, was fired by Trump a few weeks ago, or months ago now. And so I was trying to respond to our moment that we're living in, and to create an artwork from that. So for me, even if the artwork might be difficult to look at, the process of creating a work and working through ideas I'm thinking about is a point of joy for me. And I think also I just had my last day of teaching for the semester. And as difficult as it is, teaching young people is amazing. They have so much to offer, and to open doors for them, and to just allow them to see pathways that are possible is probably the best, the best way to give back that I can think of. So that's the other thing that gives me joy.
Can I just sorry, if I could just butt in. This work is currently on view at Luis de Jesus. Sorry, I gotta pimp everybody here. This work is on view at Luis de Jesus right now.
Thank you.
I just wanted to plug one more thing, is I am a co-producer of the ACT UP LA Oral History Project. We've been collecting interviews for 5 years. We're probably headed into our last 6 months. So if we haven't approached you and you were a member of ACT UP, please see me tonight, or if you want to donate money. And we've interviewed over 100 people, and we have learned in the course of this project, of course we knew back then, but there's been over 100 members that we've been able to locate that we have also lost. So it is a project, intense project.
Closer. Just hold it closer.
Okay, anyway, whoever heard that.
All right, Joey, what is bringing you joy?
Well, first of all, art, that's always there. But having said that, Native Angelino, second generation, Californian, but I have a second cousin. He and his wife live in New York. They just moved to Tribeca, and they have a son, my little cousin Rudy, who just turned 2. I cannot look or talk or see Rudy without feeling a tremendous amount of joy. I see this little human being, and he's growing up, and what it does is it makes me more committed to get through this, excuse my French, fucking political fascist takeover, whatever, because I don't want my cousins to grow up in a society that would be based upon what we see currently. So I also found out that Michaela, the mother, is due for her second child in March, so I will have 2 native New Yorkers in my family. And I also have my other cousins in Chicago. I now have Serafina and Conchetta, who are around the same age, and I have 2 native Chicagoans in my family now. So that brings me joy.
Amazing. What a great question. Okay, one more question. You, sir.
So we talked about a lot of people who have passed away who left a legacy. I'm sorry about my voice. By the way, I'm one of the co-founders of Gay and Lesbian Latinos Unidos and the founder of Viva, and Joey and Rubén that used to be part of Viva, the queer Latino collective.
Que Viva from, yeah,
Viva,
that you start.
yeah, we call it enterprise. But, and so my question is, what do you want your legacy to be?
The question is, what do you want your legacy to be? Who wants to start? That's just a simple question. Easy peasy. Rubén looks like he's...
Well, I'll go first because I'm on this side.
We'll go down the road.
No, I want my legacy to be my art. I mean that's as
Ditto.
distinctive as I can put it, right? And whatever that may end up being. Every now and then I do, especially when I'm stoned, I think about, wow, 100 years from now, someone's going to look at this art. I just wonder, how are they going to view it? How is it going to impact them? What are they going to think? How are they going to feel? Are they going to like it? Is it going to be something like, what is this? I don't know. I just and I don't know what to believe in, but if I'm around at that time, flying up either from down there or up there, I'm really curious to see how my art will, become my legacy.
Yeah, the answer is the same. And you also have to realize when you put artwork out there as societies, the lens changes through time. So maybe this artwork in 50 years will be looked completely different than what we see now. You have to remember that this age scourge and this thing that we went through, at the end of the day, it's about life and death. And what is more universal than life and death? And love, of course, right? So this picture here of my dead first husband could be looked through a completely different lens. What that lens is, we don't know. But I want it to be out there as some sort of a remembrance of something that people went through at this period. And we're super young people with amazing promise were snatched away. So art is very important. I'm not going to cry.
You could cry. Of course, the art, but I would also say that the critical framework that underlies the art would be what I would hope. The idea that as a generation we were looking at larger social and cultural issues and trying to find ways of responding to those. And art is just the form that it took. But it's about the response, so that other people, their response was in poetry, their response was in scholarship, their response was in other things. So in that sense, we're working together. And it's just, visual art is one of the outcomes of that practice. And I think for next generations not to lose that idea that there isn't agency to our practice, right? It comes out of ACT UP, it comes out of the idea of trying to change the world, work to acknowledge existing challenges, and to make those conversations shared and potentially enjoyable and pleasurable and engaging in ways that sometimes it feels overwhelming when you're watching the news and you're thinking, how can I even get up tomorrow, right? And this is a way of I think, giving back and sharing with people.
Well, this is something that when you asked me earlier why I picked up a camera, and so I didn't say this, but I forgot, but now I remember. Back in, the early 90s, and I call it, that's my own, golden age of queer activism, because, besides ACT UP, there was Queer Nation, there was the Dyke March. I felt like in the media, when there were a lot of photographs or coverage, it was mainly San Francisco and New York. And I'm like, wait, there's all this stuff happening in LA, and what we usually saw in the media about LA was really Hollywood celebrities. But not everyone's a Hollywood celebrity, and there is a vibrant, vital queer community throughout Los Angeles, and those people are being ignored by, who's the queer star that came out, or, the best, queer representation on film. But, our community goes beyond that. And so I'm just hoping that people will see in my photographs beyond, like, well, I don't really have any Hollywood celebrity photos, but that there are people that were vital to the community, so important. Right now we're seeing a photograph of Kimberly Kim, who's a very well-known bartender and talented musician. I met her first when she was bartending with Vaginal Davis's club in West Hollywood called Brick Tops. And then she has, continued at various queer clubs. And this photograph is at the very first Dyke Day LA in Barnsdall Park in 2008. But yeah, I wanted people to, see representation of queer LA beyond the celebrity. Although, she is kind of a celebrity in our community, so.
I was super excited to moderate this conversation because for many years when I lived in New York City, I was a volunteer at Gay Men's Health Crisis, where I supported a buddy who didn't speak English in just doing daily activities like going to the doctor, shopping, helping with whatever the buddy needed, I would do. And my client, when I first started our relationship, he was in really bad shape. He was living in an AIDS hospice on the Lower East Side. And this was right around the time of protease inhibitors, and he is one of those stories of people who turned around from death's doorstep because of protease inhibitors. And one day I showed up at the hospice, and he was feeling good enough to go out. And so him and two of his buddies from the hospice took me to a sex toy shop on the Lower East Side, where they proceeded to dismount an inflatable phallus that was on display on the wall and start to bonk each other on the head with it. And so this leads to my final flash round, which is, the AIDS pandemic was a terrifying time. It still is terrifying in a million ways, but it was also filled with these moments of solidarity and warmth and humor and, a giant inflatable phallus and like three guys like bonking each other on the head with it. So I want to know, what is the memory of that era that you hold dearest? Joey, why don't you start?
I've got, dozens of memories like that.
You get one.
Just one. So, when I was in high school, I was a volunteer with La Huelga, Cesar Chavez Great Boycott, and we get people to sign petitions and to not go into, this supermarket, for non-union lettuce or grapes, whatever. And that my activism then segued into, gay liberation and then HIV and AIDS. I think it was in '88 when the Names Project quilt was first laid out in Washington, D.C., and I went to it. And at that time, you couldn't even get within 5 feet of the Names Project quilt without just bursting into tears. And that's what I was doing. One of the things that they would do when they display it is that they would have people up at a podium with a microphone just reading the names, right? And probably a lot of you are familiar with that. And I remember hearing this voice, and I said, God, that voice sounds so familiar. Who is it? And I went over to the podium, and it was Cesar Chavez. So for me, it was like, a full circle, and yeah.
Beautiful. Rubén.
Again, simple pleasures, right? The last year of my first partner's life was pretty brutal. And so the day-to-day was pretty horrific. I would bathe him. There was all kinds of different things. But on the weekends, we would take, I was trying to remember this drug we would take. So on the weekends, I would pick him up and go for drives. I had a smart Volkswagen convertible. And so we put the top down, turned the music up, and he would measure the drugs he would give me because I was driving. So we would start downtown Houston, then we'd go to Montrose, and then we'd go to the fancy part of town, River Oaks, in Houston. This is all in Houston. And we would take those drives. And I remember those drives dearly because you could tell he was really happy. We were both high, driving.
It's flat. It's okay.
Yeah.
It's
anyway,
okay, you got
I
it.
never got arrested, but those were the best times. I mean, we had many other great times, but I'm saying those from that period. I remember that. Yeah.
Beautiful. Ken?
That's a good question. I keep thinking about what it would be. I think for me it has to be just before I left New York. I had a show at the Limelight nightclub, which is a big nightclub, very fancy. And
It was in an old church.
Yeah, and I had my first art exhibition in the basement. It's called the Laundry Room. It literally was a laundry room in the basement, and full of laundry machines for whatever reason, and the paintings were just in there. The lighting was no light at all. I had worked so hard on this painting, you couldn't see anything. And there were these go-go guys with just their underwear on, little semi-erect, dancing in front of it, because it's like the club room or whatever. And on the one hand, it seemed like a disappointing art experience. And on the other hand, it was just so much fun to be in that room, and I just felt so, I can't remember all the people that were there, but it was just like this amazing experience, and to be in the middle of it, I guess, in that way, as a young artist, just seemed so magical.
Judy?
This is, I'm sitting here like, which one? Because there's so many. But I guess I will mention, in 1990, there was a national action in Atlanta at the CDC, where the action was to demand the expansion of the AIDS definition to include women's opportunistic infections. We marched in the pouring rain, did an action outside. Some activists went into the classroom, took them over, and explained why we were doing the action. But it was just such an empowering situation, in spite of all of the challenges with, the local Atlanta law enforcement, the weather, meeting activists from all over the country for the first time, which I still know some of them to this day. And so that was probably for me the most, one of the most dear moments, because it was just, again, empowering and meaningful. And eventually, a couple of years later, they did expand the definition to include women's opportunistic infections. So,
Thank you so much. I would also, what a great crew. You guys are so inspiring. Also, I want to thank our sign language interpreters who have been working it all night. They are amazing. And the crew back there that has been managing many slides and my chaotic directions. Darren and Ed at the Broad, thank you for hosting this, and thank you all for turning out tonight. I know it's the holiday season and it's crazy to go to stuff, but we are very grateful.
thank you, Carolina.